When we left William H. Mumler in Part 1, it was 1863 in Boston, Massachusetts. Mumler had accidentally discovered he could capture ghostly images in his photography, and then began offering this service to the public, for a charge, of course. He became a prominent fixture in the spiritualist movement, that is, until someone found out that one of his quote-unquote ghosts was a very alive woman still in town. Boston was about to turn on William H. Mumler. Today, we conclude his story. This is A Study of Strange. Welcome to the show. I'm Michael May. We're picking back up with guest Timothy Donahue today, my former co-host on the Autobiography TV shows. For those jumping in, I'd suggest starting from part 1. Otherwise, enjoy. This is the first real sign that Mumler is going to run into issues when this alive, dead / real spirit
alive person,
shows
alive
up.
Real person.
Yes, and even
Right.
including H.F. Gardner, who had been a supporter of Mumler and had been trying to get people to really scrutinize his work and was really hoping he was real. He actually wrote into a newspaper and had a quote, and it is way too long to waste everybody's time reading. So let me just find like the best part of it here. He says, "I deeply regret the necessity that compels me through evidence to state with equal frankness that I am satisfied beyond a doubt that in the instances above referred to, Mr. Mumler or some person connected with Mrs. Stewart's rooms have been guilty of deception in palming off as genuine spirit likenesses pictures of a person who is now living in this city. Yours for the truth, H.F. Gardner, M.D., Boston, February 20th, 1863. I almost said 1963. That would have been interesting.
He was around a good while.
Yes. So for those history buffs out there, in 1863, you'll know it's the middle of the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
It may have been the downfall of William Mumler in Boston because his legitimacy or his respect, I'll call it, in the area starts to go downhill.
Right. Once the viral thing goes in the wrong direction and everyone's like, well, these were, which could be coincidences, could be an accident, could be anything. But regardless, I think there's a ding in the armor there. It definitely seems like something's up.
Yes.
Which I would completely believe. But
yes.
Yeah.
So apparently Mumler wanted to get away. To move, but because it was the war, it took him a while to actually get up and leave. But in 1869, he and Hannah moved to New York City. Specifically, I think the studio they were working out of was at 630 Broadway. And the spiritualist movement was still going very strong because of the war. It didn't take long for Mumler to kind of start up his career as a spirit photographer again in New York. And 1869, he starts up his career as a spirit photographer again. He starts getting a lot of clients. The spiritualist movement is still strong because it's so soon after the war. But it didn't take long for people to also start to complain. So a city marshal named Joseph H. Tooker led the investigation into Mumler, and this started with finding Mumler's name in a complaint book. So, okay. As it happens. And on March 16th, 1869, at the studio at 630 Broadway, a gentleman that was calling himself William Bowditch or Bowditch, and or depending on what accounts you read, also William Wallace is sometimes the name quoted.
Sure.
But this was actually Tooker himself. He was using an alias and pretending to be a gentleman that wanted a spirit photograph and wanted to take a picture with a dead relative. And he goes into the studio. Mrs. Hannah Stewart is there, who's obviously married to Mumler at this time. And they take a picture. He watches the process happen. And on his picture, as it's being developed, a ghostly figure emerges. And he doesn't recognize the ghostly figure in the photo as, his dead relative that he said he wanted to see. And William Mumler apparently told him, and this is not a quote, this is me sort of surmising what he was saying, but he was like, give it time. It's sometimes hard to recognize, your dead relatives. Just kind of planting the seeds with the power of suggestion to try to convince him that this is,
Sure.
in fact, is his dead relative. However, William Mumler gets arrested instead. Tooker's men arrest him on April 12th, and the charge was swindling credulous persons by what he called spirit photographs, is what Tooker sort of quoted to the newspaper articles at the time. A gentleman named Elbridge Gerry was the prosecutor in the case, and this got a lot of attention because the spiritualist movement was very big at the time. This is in New York City, the heart of America,
Hmm.
the big city of America.
So
And
word's going to travel quick. I
word
mean, that's going to
travels
get
really
around.
quick, and because
Yeah.
of the Twitter of the day, all these different newspapers and journals and publications, and a lot of them were spiritualist publications. They all wrote about this case, and they all wrote about the trial during the hearings, because it didn't go to trial; it was just hearings to sort of establish a trial over many days. But the prosecution presented 7 to 9 processes. Where they were guessing how William Mumler could have pulled off this fraudulent activity. So I won't go through all of them, but some people, one of them was that there was a figure of a tiny ghost in the camera. So like almost like a toy or a cutout or something that would be in the lens itself was one of their theories.
Okay.
Some people,
Okay.
yeah, some people thought it was a second glass plate, which is actually a way more valid theory, I would think. But again, they didn't know. They were just like, he could have done it in one of these ways. There was no evidence to any one particular method, and that is kind of the downfall for the prosecution in this case, because they didn't have enough evidence to convict or to actually just send him to trial. So what's
That's a funny
interesting?
thing to have to try to prove. It's sort
Yeah,
of
isn't
like,
it?
I mean, yeah, because unless they sort of go, oh, here he is red-handed with, you know, all his gear, and here's how he did it, and it's all laid out. Yeah, it's just so like, what do you? It's all guessing. I mean, yeah, it's such a strange thing because you're like, how do you
Yeah.
prove that he faked it success? Because it's like if there's no real path to finding that because there's no evidence or whatever, but it's like you can't just be like, well, he didn't. I mean, he didn't take a picture of a ghost, right? So it's probably fake. You can't just say that. So it's not
Yeah.
gonna. That's not good for anybody. So yeah, was wondering from the jump is just like legally, if they don't literally, if someone wasn't like, oh, I was looking through the window and I saw him take the plate out and then put it back in, or take one from a pile marked, you know, 30-year-old females in white dresses or whatever, and like he's got a catalog of ghost images to knock on there. Like, yeah, what is the prosecution other than just kind of a joke? Because they're just like, well, he could have done this. It's like, well, you could say that about any case where you're like, it could have gone like this, and it just turns into the end of Clue, and you're like, well, unless somebody pulls a gun out, there's really nothing much to say at the end of all this. I don't know. It's funny. It's a weird setup all around.
Yes, indeed. And the best part about this that I haven't even mentioned to you yet, it's in my intro, but the prosecution, their big witness, the person they thought would seal the deal and definitely send this to trial and Mumler would be
Tell me it was a ghost.
convicted.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I wish now that you say that. No, it was P.T. Barnum, the
Ah,
well-renowned circus, producer, creator, owner, famous for very, very crazy stories himself,
yeah.
that are amazing. But it's interesting because P.T. Barnum, very famous at the time. I mean, that's like, man, what would you equate him to now? Like
I don't know. Just sort of like an entertainer on that
Spielberg,
level.
or
Is it
like
like
it'd be like a studio head that
George
also,
Lucas or something?
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know. Like, or yeah,
exactly.
maybe I don't know.
No, it would be something like
10 years
that.
ago.
It's like the Duffer Brothers. It's like
Yeah, right. The new
the new one.
P.T. Barnum,
Yeah.
the Duffer Brothers.
But P.T. Barnum, as much as he had freak shows and circuses and mistreated many, many, many employees, and
Mhm.
animals and everything else, he actually, much like you were talking about Houdini earlier, and how people in the entertainment world did not like mediums, because mediums are lying about what they're doing. We're entertainers. Like, no, 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 we're doing the same stuff. We're entertaining you. We're not lying about where it's coming from and
Right.
what it's doing. And he had a similar thought process. He actually had some of Mumler's work hung up in sort of like I forget what he called it, but it was like the Hall of Frauds or something like that. And it's like pictures of like crazy people that are defrauding people. And so he did not like William Mumler or what William Mumler stood for. And so he took
Sure.
the stand and claimed, he knew Mumler's work, and he is an expert on humbuggery, is what he called it, which is the greatest
What?
word, humbuggery,
Humbuggery? Okay.
which is the greatest word of all time and just so appropriate for that era as well. So he's an expert in humbuggery. They should listen to him. And Mumler's a freak, and he's using people and using grief, and the guy should be. Yeah, I don't think he said this, but the guy should be locked up. Lock him up, everybody. I'm P.T. Barnum. And then he probably dropped the
He
proverbial
did say his own name a
microphone.
lot, I bet.
I'm P.T.
Sure.
Barnum.
He dropped his loudspeaker or whatever it was, a big cone that he was yelling through in the middle of a small courtroom.
Listen to me. I'm
Yeah,
P.T.
Jesus.
Barnum. Listen to me. He's a humbugger.
He's a humdinger or a hamburger? A hamburger. Right.
He's a hamburger. Don't listen to him. So that was the big deal. And the prosecution thought they had it won, but the defense also had people speak that believed in Mumler, that talked about how his photographs helped them. He also the defense lawyer quoted this. I'm going to read this. It's very interesting, but he used the Bible in the defense. Because he said, I offer these, the 16th chapter of Genesis as showing appearances in the form of spirits, also in the 19th chapter of Genesis, first verse, the 21st chapter of Genesis, verses 17 through 19, the 22nd chapter of Genesis, 10 through 19, the 22nd chapter of Numbers, 21 through 35, the 5th chapter of Joshua, 13 through 15, etc., etc., etc. He just goes on and on and on about where there are spirits mentioned in the Bible and where people see them.
So the Bible was a witness?
The Bible was essentially
sort of a record of this being truth. Like essentially, like if you believe what's in here, you got to believe what he's doing, because it's the same thing.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Yep.
That is a quality defense attorney right there.
Indeed. And so again, remember, this takes place over many days, this hearing, and the newspapers are writing about it every day. So this really is, a lot of people thought, the trial of the century at the time, even though it wasn't even a trial. It was just a hearing. It's amazing. But at the end of it, the judge believed that there was fraud. He believed that William Mumler was faking all these things. But when witnesses spoke of what it meant to them, and also the fact that no one had caught Mumler in the act, the judge had to dismiss. And so the prosecution thought they had won, and they lost. They actually still, spun it as, but now people know that Mumler is a fake. We may not have gone to trial, but we still won because he's off the streets and he's not going to swindle anybody no more. I turned into a 1930s gangster instead of an 1860s trial attorney in New York.
They were on their way there. It's all right.
So
it's funny. It sounds a little like you're like, he got off because people liked what he was doing. So you're like, it's not illegal because people are enjoying it, which is definitely not something that happens a lot. So that's just that's so strange. But I mean, at the end, really, there's just there wasn't evidence that he was doing the thing.
Yes.
Then what are you really standing on there? Because you can't disprove it, but.
Right.
And he's not going to be like, well, actually how I do it is, because then he's, giving himself up. So it's just such a strange thing to try to prove anyway.
It is. And it's honestly, I think it's even interesting that they went to a hearing, because I would have, it's really interesting. So Mumler gets exposed to a certain extent. And what's interesting, and in my research and the 2 books I read and then a bunch of things online, some people say that he never recovered financially. Others say that he did, and his business sort of took off because of all the attention he got. So I don't know what to believe, but we do.
He was the Tiger King of his day. That's
right.
What he didn't land
That's
on. Literally. I will never financially recover from this. That is. He became the Tiger King meme. But 100 years earlier.
Right.
Sorry. Anyway.
But what we do know is in 1872, a woman that called herself Mrs. Lindell came to his studio. and she wanted to take a picture. She had lost a husband. She posed for a picture, and that is the famous photo of Mary Todd Lincoln with Abraham Lincoln behind her. And so the folklore around that picture is that she claimed to be somebody else, Mrs. Lindell, and they took the photo, and the Abraham Lincoln ghost, appeared magically when Mumler didn't know who she was because she had called herself Mrs. Lindell. I don't know if I believe that story. That is the common story told, and I cannot find evidence against that. But I do have to suspect, especially because I do have the bias, the belief that Mumler was a fake for many
Sure.
reasons. But I do not believe that he did not know that she was Mary Todd Lincoln. So that is just his most famous photo. So it's worthy of discussion and putting it out there for people. Hey, if you guys research that, if people find another version of that story, I would love to hear it. Please email me and let me know.
And we can confirm that that was in fact Mary Todd Lincoln. Like that we know that that was her in the photograph.
We can confirm as much as like that is what everybody believes. It is undoubtedly her, but I don't know how else to confirm that, with the exception of just
Right.
everybody saying it's Mary Todd Lincoln. And also, she was a devout believer in supernatural
Hmm.
things, and she had seances in the White House, and she was a big believer in spiritualism. So it fits that she would know who Mumler was
Yeah.
because of the attention of the trial and all of that. So it just, everything kind of connects to make sense that that was her. So
Yeah.
what does this story of Mumler mean? How do we feel about spirit photography in general? I mean, do you have any thoughts about what it may have meant to people? Not whether it was fake or not, but just like the act of it, or act of having it, or people curious about it.
Yeah, I totally get people being curious about it because, like with anything new, when it comes to technology, it's going to be fascinating. I mean, there's that sort of famous quote that I'm still going to probably get wrong, but any sufficiently advanced technology should be indistinguishable from magic. And so what I think he had stumbled onto was the bleeding edge of photography at that moment, and a new kind of aspect of it to exploit. And again, I don't necessarily mean that as exploit always sounds like you're doing something wrong, but you're just trying to figure it out, take it apart, and use it in new ways. And again, I think it just kind of spiraled out of control. But I think that, it probably meant something to a lot of people to have, even if somewhere in the back of their mind they're like, this is probably not real, but it provides some comfort. And if there's enough of a kernel there that says maybe it's real, then that could mean something to somebody. Now, whether that's good or bad or not, I'm not going to pass judgment on them for feeling one way or the other. But what I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to when people are at the forefront of a technology and nobody else is up to speed on how it works. That is a very, very easy place for large amounts of people to believe something, or something is happening, or something is not happening, or whatever, or something works or doesn't work, because they just don't understand how the technology works. So when you're in that, group of most people, especially at that time, I'm guessing the number of people who had experienced photography firsthand was like in the dozens at most, in terms of even subjects or people doing it. I mean, it was probably just a handful of people. The general public looking at a photograph, which is probably just unbelievable to their eyes anyway,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're seeing this apparition in it. It's just like, it's all so overwhelming. I mean, you
Yeah.
hear stories about the first moving pictures of like the train coming into the station and people running, screaming from the theater because they just couldn't even process what was going on. It looked like a train was about to run them over. So when you look at something new like that, and you just don't, you can't look at it and go, oh, because they use a plate and they could just expose twice, and that's, oh, it's kind of fun trick. You don't have the knowledge base to look at something and sort of decode it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You're just kind of like bowled over by this magic, which is great. And I think that's such a wonderful feeling to experience, because it's so rare now. Because like we were saying earlier, we're so sort of cynical about anything uh, visual, or anything that can be touched and manipulated, which is basically everything you see and hear
Mm-hmm.
now. I think it's incredible, and I'm so envious of people who got that experience of seeing a moving image for the first time in their adulthood, because that's got to just be like, it's just like a portal opened up. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we've seen augmented reality. I've done a lot of virtual reality stuff, and that's all like really fun. But because you get what's going on, you're like, well, my head's basically wrapped in a monitor. This is what's going on. I know I'm not actually somewhere else. Um, you don't really just you don't believe it wholeheartedly, and I think there's just a difference in mentality
Yeah.
and just technological knowledge back then that allows for these things to sneak through. Now, things like that are still happening today, very clearly, but they're just people have to find different mediums for them,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
guess. But
it is. That is,
yeah,
it's so important to understand this story because if you look at these photos and you're like, these are so stupid. Why did anybody believe that these were actual
right, in
spirits?
context,
But
it's
in
like,
context, it was, and I said it when we first started the first part of this episode or this story. But with Morse code and photography
mm,
in the middle of this century, it was supernatural. It was
yeah,
supernatural to people. And there were some people that didn't want to get photos because they were scared of it. They didn't know what it meant to get a picture made.
yeah,
And then you do see, obviously this story takes place before the telephone, but the telephone comes around in the next few decades, and that astounds people, and that's a supernatural thing.
oh
And you
yeah,
mentioned early movies, and people would run out of the theater after a train
yeah.
flew by. I mean, I don't know what would equate to us today, but it may be like the Tom Cruise deep fake TikTok
I know,
videos
I
or
was thinking
whatever.
about that.
It's
Yeah,
like
because
wait,
you look at
Tom
that and you're like, well,
Cruise?
that's got to be real. It's like, well, it's not, but like
Yeah.
he didn't just do a backflip in a hallway and hang out with whoever it was.
Yeah.
But well, although he might have, he does a lot of amazing stuff. But yeah, it's I can't think of something now because I think we're so primed to just not believe whatever we see that I think there's something called retinal projection, which when it comes to VR and things like that is if that actually becomes a thing because it's essentially shooting a laser into your retina, like onto your retina. So instead of seeing what you see, it'll literally just be taken over by the image. It's not like you're putting on VR goggles and you can see around the edges and you can kind of see the pixels and all that kind of stuff. It'll just be like, oh, you just flipped on a different reality. I think that's going to be crazy. That and augmented reality where things can be superimposed into your real life. Like you could just be in your house and all of a sudden, the horror movie is in your house. Like somebody's at the window, someone's,
Yeah. Yeah.
aliens are crawling in through the ceiling. Like it can just be blended with your reality. I think that kind of stuff will be amazing and probably hard for people to deal with. But I don't know. It's all. I think when you look at it through the lens of somebody like me, who's experienced a lot of technology and been involved in photography and some color correction and seeing visual effects and all that kind of stuff, you get inherently sort of skeptical about things like this. But I definitely have a hope. Excuse me. I definitely have a hope that I will experience something that is so overwhelming and amazing that I just cannot figure it out. And I love like close up magic and things like that
Mm-hmm.
because I know there's a trick to it, but it's still so
Yeah.
fun because it's done so well. So when you can experience things like that, I think it's really fantastic. But I always have in the back of my mind, like, yeah, I know there's a trick. I know he didn't, it didn't bend the key with his mind or what, any of that kind of stuff. It's like there's a way that the Statue of Liberty disappears, but it's so fun to experience. But so I feel a little bit bad that people would go into things like that hoping for a real connection to someone that they loved and missed,
Yeah.
and it's such a terrible thing to exploit that. Um, but at the same time, if they went their whole life and believed it and thought they had that one last interaction and it doesn't really hurt anybody else, then I can't completely say what's the harm, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a
It,
funny gray area.
it is a funny gray area, and it makes me think about a few things outside of the technology discussion, which is very pertinent. I'm glad we just had that.
Mm.
But also when it comes with dealing with the passing of loved ones and how we use things like photos or images or videos to remember them. Back then, you didn't have a family photo album. Photography was still new, it was still relatively expensive. So the way to remember your dead family was to do something like this, or take
Mm.
in the 19th century there were, excuse me, the Yeah, the 19th century. Sorry, in the 19th century, there was this kind of fad where people would take pictures, like posed pictures of dead loved ones, like either dead
Right. Yeah.
babies, dead uncles, dead grandparents, whatever it was. They would even pose with them. They would dress them up, and we look at that today and we think it's kind of morbid. But that was their. They didn't have
Mm.
photos. That was their only photo of that loved one. So they wanted to do that to
Yeah.
remember them. And then if you think about what we do today, that might be considered kind of morbid or weird in the future is there's Facebook accounts. There's what millions of people on Facebook that are actually deceased. And
Sure.
people
Yeah.
will comment on their dead relatives or dead friends' Facebook page and be like, "I miss you. Wish you were still here." Like
Yeah.
that is a thing that we do nowadays. Um, and then on another side too, with outside of the sort of remembering a loved one, but also photography, as much as again it was created to capture the truth or capture realism. Uh, Ever since it was started, we've been modifying what is real in pictures and stuff. Not somebody like spirit photography in this example, but even there was a famous Civil War photographer, and a lot of the amazing photographs we have of the Civil War. He would pose. He would go onto the battlefield and move dead bodies to get them
Mm.
in a different position, or put them near a fallen cap or a musket that wasn't there originally. He would pose these photos to, in his words, they were to make the public better understand what happened.
Mm.
And there's even, oh man, when I was at film school, what is it? One of the early, was it Lumiere? There was one of the early famous filmmakers who would do like documentary shorts. And there's the famous like end of work at a factory where everybody piles out of the factory in a line. And that's
Oh
the movie.
yeah.
And apparently he made everybody go home and change to do it again. And here it was supposed to be capturing the end of a work day, but he like had to do a second take. That's kind of the story behind that. So it's, I don't know. I don't have a point to that, except it just makes, that's where my brain goes when we talk about this stuff and how media is never exactly real. And we
Oh
definitely
yeah. So
should
it's
be
a
skeptical of
version.
it. Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
version of
It's a
reality.
version of
Yeah.
reality. I mean, when you really get down into the nuts and bolts of it, like everything we experience is a interpretation. Our vision is an image that's an interpretation in our brain. Touch is all electrical signals and things that
Hmm.
all just exist in our brain. So we're already one step removed. So if you add one more or two more, then it's
Yeah.
sort of,
Yeah.
if you know what you're doing, you can sell it pretty easily.
Uh-huh.
But yeah,
Yeah, so let's get into some theories real quick before we wrap up,
sure.
because I would love to share some of these ideas and also get some of your points or theories as well. Um, so William Hope, I mentioned him at the beginning of this
Mm,
story. He was another famous spirit photographer decades later after Mumler, but he was caught multiple times. People would catch him swapping plates in his hand because he was still using a similar plate process,
sure.
and he would be caught with something he had prepared in a second plate. Um, it's also
You said
worth
multiple times, so
multiple.
he
Yeah,
basically like
William Hope
so he
was
kept
caught
at it,
multiple times and kept at it because
which is indicative of like how slow information travels
yeah,
back then a little bit because
yeah.
it isn't like, oh, it's on Twitter now. It's like, no, he can move to another town and like keep doing this for a
It's
minute.
how slow
Yeah.
information moved, but also the power of belief. People
Mm,
wanted to believe, so they would come up with
yeah.
excuses about why, oh, that can't be true. Someone's just making it up because they don't want it to be true or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Mumler, interestingly, destroyed all his negatives that he had left before he died. So that is
Yeah.
an interesting piece of evidence there. Um, so the main theories about what he did is that he used sleight of hand because he would have the plate and
Sure.
he would do something to either slip a second plate behind the plate he was using when it went into the camera, something like that. And that is, you talked about close up magic. That's close up magic right
Yep.
there. It's like there's a
Yep.
lot of people that know how to do that and have always known how to do that. So that is a very plausible thing. Double exposure, which is involved with like all these theories, but just in general that he maybe hid a plate inside the camera that had another exposure on it or something along
Mhm.
those lines. Um, there was that in the hearing. Someone thought that there was like a fake ghost in the camera. That his
I'd
cameras
love to
were,
see evidence of
yeah,
that.
his
That's
cameras
good.
were
That's a good one.
inspected. His cameras were
Yeah.
inspected, and nothing like that was ever found. So that is
And there
not
wasn't like a
Mumler's
secret
true.
compartment for a second plate or any of that
Right,
kind of
right.
stuff. I guess it was all,
So yeah, his cameras were always very highly scrutinized by the other photographers that would watch him. Vox Media, I'll share a link to this, but Vox Media created a video that's on YouTube with someone showing how they think William Mumler did this, and it's a
huh.
combination of all the above. They would use sleight of hand. They would,
Some little man in the camera,
no,
because
no,
that's
no little
I'm
man,
hoping
all
that
the no little
there's
man.
he only helped a little bit, but not as much as you'd
Yeah.
think.
But what they did on Vox Media is they would have like another photograph taken, and I'm probably misremembering this exactly, so everybody should watch it. It's really fun. But
Hmm.
they would trace an outline of their subject onto a glass plate, and they would use that to line up the like
Hmm.
ghostly image they would do. And then they had an actor wear like all white to look like a ghost, and they would take that photo, and then they would have that behind the other glass plate during the second picture, because that way the ghost wouldn't get as
Okay.
developed, as exposed.
Yeah.
Um,
Is there
and
any chance somebody would just pop in while they were taking the photo, like
just like
silently,
run
like they
through.
just
Yeah,
raise a curtain and there's just a
yeah.
guy there for like 10 seconds and then disappears and then there he is. Maybe it was a single exposure. They
See,
just had
I think that's
somebody would have
possible,
cracked.
but someone would have cracked. Someone would have said
Yeah.
something. Someone would have noticed it as well. So my problem with the Vox Media video with their theory is they
Uh,
used an actor and they like traced images on the glass. And the way Mumler was scrutinized, he could not have done any of that. That would have taken too much
hmm.
time. You have too many things that can happen to be caught in that process. I think he used a version of that, though. I think he had prepared images of whatever the
Hmm.
ghost was. And he would
Yeah.
pose whoever was taking a picture. He would pose them in a way that he knows that the ghost image would sort of play within the framing that
Sure.
he
Yeah.
had.
He'd know
Um,
they were on the, basically frame left, frame right. And
yep,
then from
yep.
there, if you keep organized a little bit, then you're in okay shape.
Indeed. And there was a term for it, and I don't have it written down. I'm going to get better about my notes, everybody. I
Hmm.
promise. But there were these popular, like, baseball card size photographs in the 1860s with famous figures on them. So,
Hmm.
including the president, President Lincoln.
Uh, ah.
And I actually think he used those to create a lot of his ghostly images, to use those in the exposure process. The reason I thought of that is because it would come up in research of how it's the same sort of size of the kind of photographs he would
Hmm.
take, but also the Abraham Lincoln photo. He never took a picture of Abraham Lincoln. He wouldn't have that somewhere in the copies of things or on a glass plate
Sure.
somewhere in a negative. I think he would have used the Abraham Lincoln photo and the famous Mary Todd Lincoln picture. He would have had from one of those kind of famous, sort of popular kind of collectible pictures that everybody had back then. And so that's how I think he did it. Do you have anything you want to add? Any theorizing?
I think we nailed it with the little man living in the camera, rapidly painting an image on the glass in the moments he had
Yes,
in between
yes.
the. No, yeah, I think there are probably details that we won't know, just sort of like a Houdini trick or something like that. But it's likely prepped plates. They were ready to go, or I mean, as you were saying it, I was like, oh, maybe it's in the development process, not the exposure. So if you took the plate into the dark room, I don't know if people went into the dark room with him, but he could have a, on the or however he was doing it. If it's anything like now, now you print it onto a piece of paper and develop that. But if there's something in the development process where you could add an additional image onto it or project onto it briefly, onto the chemicals before they're washed and processed and all that, but very likely, yeah. It's just a double exposure. I think that's
Yes.
if that's the
Yeah.
simplest version, that's probably it.
It
And if
all
they're like,
comes
well, he
down to
didn't,
some type
yeah,
of double exposure, and it just really comes down to where
hmm,
and when did he do it? Did he do it with a second glass plate? So when that glass is being exposed to light to create
hmm.
that negative, there would be a second one that he sort of used sleight of hand to get behind it, or was it in the development process? Somewhere in there is
Yeah. I
I
mean, maybe
believe
he
where he
figured
did
out their
that.
chemicals that after he takes a picture and he scrubs it. If you do X,
Mm.
Y, or Z or apply different, they are still there, or
Yep.
they're
Yep.
remnants,
Yep.
but it looks clean. but it actually isn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's still enough remnants. So if you process it again,
Yeah.
you have to give it an acid bath or something to like really clean the glass. But if you don't and you just kind of wipe it off, there's still like, enough of something
Yeah.
behind. And maybe he discovered what that is and how to, it's like,
Mhm.
oh, if I only use this chemical, it doesn't quite clean it, but it looks clean. That
Yeah.
kind of thing. I think there's some
And,
version of that. Likely that's the story.
and for people that believed it or believe that he was some sort of medium and was able to do this, I think it's interesting to note again the glass plate process he used, because the fact that they were reusable plates, I think, is how he initially discovered that first ghostly image. I think it was
Sure.
not a clean plate. It's also worth noting he didn't ever use a different type of photography. So if he was a medium, it shouldn't matter what type of photography he's using.
Right. You
It
use a
should matter.
tintype or whatever,
Yeah.
and it's just sort of like,
But the fact that
or
it's a glass
cyanotype,
plate,
any of that stuff.
yeah. So in a glass
Yeah.
plate, which is a negative, so he can make copies, he can do all those kind of things. That's what allowed this to be done. And it is also, people had he was not the one that to discover creating this ghostly image. A few years before he kind of discovered it, there was actually a book published of like ghostly images, these like spirit photographs. But the people that discovered that process and made the book thought it was funny. So they didn't lie about what it was. They would pose these. And actually, when you do Google spirit photography from back then, you do come across some of these images.
Sure.
But it's like, someone looking really scared and there's like this ghostly figure next to him, or someone in a field being chased by a ghost. And they did it for fun. It was supposed to be sort of a humorous book. They were not lying and saying that these are real ghosts.
Sure.
So the process had already been discovered, but Mumler was the one that tied it in with spiritualism and started the whole process of ghost pictures. Yeah.
And then ectoplasm showed up. But I think Houdini
it did later on. Yeah. The seances, as spiritualism grew and morphed, because it has to evolve. There were the ectoplasm, where mediums would swallow cheesecloths or chewed up newspaper and regurgitate it during seances and say it was ectoplasm. So really fun times, really, really super fun. I would love to go to a seance back then. I wish I could time travel and do that. I think it would be fascinating. Yes. So, all right. Well, thank you, Tim Donahue, for being my guest. And it's an early episode, so I'm still a little.
It likely won't go to air.
It'll likely have to be redone.
A template for future improvements. I'm glad.
Well, that's the whole thing. Is I want to jump into this because the only way to get better at it is just to do it.
Oh, for sure.
So,
this is great.
So yeah, I hope.
Well,
I
had a good time. I learned something and threw out some real bad accents. So I can't wait to hear from all of New England how I'm not welcome anymore. So fortunately, I'm popping in and out next week, and then that'll be the end of it.
After studying the career of William H. Mumler, we can only theorize that his pictures were fabricated. I cannot comment on the belief that one may have about the ability of spirits to communicate through our technology, whether that be old photographic methods or modern audio and video recording devices. Mumler passed away in 1884 after destroying all remaining negative prints in his collection, which is why we can't study his techniques. At the time of his death, Mumler was more well known for inventing a process that allowed photographs to be printed in newspapers. The strange story of spirit photos may overshadow the fact that Mumler may have been a genius as a showman, a photographer, and an artist. And on that note, that's the show. Thank you so much for listening to A Study of Strange. Thank you, Tim Donahue, for coming along. If you enjoy this type of content, please subscribe to our podcast, rate, and review. You know the game. That is the most helpful way to keep podcasts getting made. For information about today's topic, visit astudyofstrange.com. And you're always welcome to reach out with information, ideas, reactions, anything, to astudyofstrange@gmail.com. That's all one word, astudyofstrange@gmail.com. Tune in next week. We have a very special episode with an expert from the Biggie Smalls murder, the mystery of the murder of Biggie Smalls, the Notorious B.I.G. Tune in then. It's going to be awesome. Good night.